Over the last 25 years, I've had the privilege of interviewing and highlighting some truly interesting people. Everyone who is anyone, both the famous and the infamous, from presidents and their first ladies to kings and queens, movie stars and pop stars, captains of industry, heads of state, sports personalities, innovative entrepreneurs, and some pretty fascinating everyday people. Today, I'm proud to introduce you to Newman, who attributes his success to his ability to see clients at their worst moments and still being able to help them. Mr. Newman, it's a pleasure to meet you. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I always enjoy talking to colleagues in the law. And again, good morning, sir. Why don't we start off by just asking, when did you first decide to pursue a career in law?
Good morning. When I was in law school, before I got to law school, I should say, when I was in college with an undergraduate major in accounting and a minor in economics, I felt there was something missing. So the next thing to try was law, and that seemed to have been something that filled the gap and the void that I was looking for.
How interesting is that? I decided to become a lawyer when I was about 8 years old, and I never went through the ballerina, Indian chief, astronaut phase. I've always known that the law was the area that I wanted to do, and I was interested in criminal law and the public interest law. What about you? In what areas do you practice, sir?
My practice has been limited for many, many years to the matrimonial area. It's something that evolved over the passage of time. When I first started practicing, divorces were not as common as they are today, and the laws were very different, and you had to show grounds, which we don't have anymore because we're all no-fault states. But basically, all that we do is matrimonials, from divorces to prenuptials to cohabitation agreements to separation agreements, custody issues, anything that goes hand in hand with the family.
So that makes complete sense. And so I'm going to just ask you, having been involved in the global pandemic and still having to practice law, I'm curious, sir, what changes occurred over the past, year and a half, because there was a lot of interest in how relationships would do coming out of a global pandemic?
Well, relationships have become somewhat strained. The people who are in the more upper strata of the economic and social community generally have more than one residence, so the parties are able to live separately, although they call it together. The people who are living together, the strain of living together and the small problems have grown to be monumental problems. So there's a great deal of tension within the household, which unfortunately impacts the children also. The part of the children is very interesting because when they're not in school, children who are the unfortunate victims of any type of domestic violence have nobody to protect them. When they're in school, the teachers are mandated reporters so that they are then protected to a great extent in that fashion. But one of the other changes has come through the court system. We don't have trials where we're standing in the courtroom. Everything is done virtually, which makes a very big difference in the way you try a case.
That makes complete sense, sir. And the matter of fact, I read that you have a background actually in accounting. And I'm curious, how do you think your background in accounting benefits your work as a lawyer, and especially a matrimonial lawyer?
Well, it's been beneficial on two levels. First, when we deal with the economics and the unwinding of a divorce, more than likely accountants are called in to testify. Most accountants aren't used to being cross-examined or examined on direct by an attorney that has a background in accounting. So I can use terminology that they understand, and it forces them to answer questions that they might otherwise not want to answer. It's also helpful in guiding a client in structuring a settlement, because you can deal with the economics of what and how the dollar should be divided. So the accounting background comes in on two levels, both in servicing the client and in the courtroom on examining professionals such as experts and business appraisers.
That's fantastic. I understand that you've made a few television appearances in the capacity as a matrimonial lawyer. And I know a little bit about being an expert on television. Talk a little bit about your experience, sir.
I think I should be asking you that question. I will defer to your expertise, but what comes to mind is when I was on Larry King Live debating Alan Dershowitz during the Woody Allen Mia Farrow situation. And it came out as a result of that interview that Alan Dershowitz had first volunteered to be a neutral, and then he took one side, which is something that ordinarily you should not ethically be permitted to do.
Correct.
I recall an interview with someone on CNN talking about prenuptial agreements. And he asked me, well, what does the client generally say? And I pointed out that More often than not, it is the wealthy parents who will call me to tell me that a child is getting married and they really want to protect the family money. My response has traditionally been the same to them. If your child is old enough to get married, your child is old enough to pick up the phone and call me.
Ethics, integrity, and honesty seem to be a part of your core values when you practice law. Have I summarized that correctly, sir?
I certainly am not going to argue with the wisdom of your summary. And it's also important because when you stand before a judge, the judges come to know who is telling them the true version and who is not. And it's important in representing a client that the court have respect for the attorney.
Mr. Newman, I know that you say you will defer to my expertise, but one of the things that I have found when doing commentary on the law, really making it user-friendly is my style, because everybody who's watching us is clearly not a lawyer. What would you say is your style, sir?
I try to be very clear and very direct with my clients. They know they're going to get the answer. It may not be what they want to hear, but I have an obligation to tell them what they need to hear. And my toughest job in all the years I've been practicing is protecting the clients from themselves, because they really only want to hear what they want to hear, but they have to face the reality of the circumstance that they're in.
Very much so. And that brings me to my question about how sensitive matrimonial law is. How do you reach compromise in such a delicate and emotionally driven legal field?
Well, first of all, it's important when you represent a client in this area that you not approach it solely for the purposes of settling. You have to be prepared to go to trial so that the other side, the adversary, and the adversary's client understand if the case isn't resolved, we are ready to go to trial. Because if you're not ready to go to trial, you're doing a disservice to the client. And if you can deal with the numbers and have a great deal of knowledge and an understanding of the economics, helps you settle the case. And also, sometimes you have to say to the client, it's wonderful to fight the battle, but aren't you better off not paying me all of that money and putting it aside for your child's education?
That is probably, Mr. Newman, my husband's bone of contention in matrimonial law. He also practices family law. That oftentimes people are at loggerheads, and despite knowing that they are spending money after money after money, they still will continue to fight. How do you convince a client that it is not in their best interest to really literally just continue to write you checks?
Well, because part of, and I'm sure your husband has said this to you, part of what we do in the matrimonial area is on a psychological level. You have to get to understand the needs of the client, the needs of the adversary. And in dealing with the clients, you have to lay it all out for them. And they have to understand the battle doesn't accomplish anything. The judge isn't going to look at them and say, oh, you're the good one, the other one's the bad one. That's not, and never is going to happen. It's the rare case when that happens. And you have to bring them back to reality. And they have to understand the more they fight, they're just giving the other side power over them, and they're wasting their time and their life. Mm-hmm. They need to get up and face reality and move forward, because they have a life ahead of them. Don't waste it in the battle.
You sound like you have really learned how to navigate matrimonial law, which obviously is your expertise. So in what ways do you feel that the negotiation is a bit of an art? And as you have outlined, how would you say you best practice that art?
Well, while we've been very serious in this interview, I find that a little humor goes a long way. It can break the tension at the bargaining table. It can ease the client. And if you can inject a little bit of humor, sometimes it breaks the ice. And sometimes you just have to let one side or the other get it off their chest. And then it opens the door to settle. But you also have to be totally conversant with the law, the changes in the law, and the particular facts of your case.
Well, clearly, counselor, you know what you're doing. And so I have to pick your brain. What advice would you give others who are seeking to enter a legal career?
It's a wonderful profession. It's an honorable profession, but think carefully about what aspect of it you want to go into. Some aspects, such as matrimonial, can be very draining on the attorney, because while we go home at night, we still carry our clients' problems with us, as opposed to just doing corporate work, where you can go home and you're not dealing with the same type of personality. In the matrimonial arena, you become the mother, the father, the brother, the sister, the clergy to your client. So it's a wonderful profession. It's an honorable profession. It's a very decent way to earn a living, but you also have to be prepared for what it's going to take of you. And it's not a 9-to-5 job, plain and simple.
That's just about as blunt as it can be. Sir, finally, what would be the one thing you'd like the viewer of this video feature to walk away with? Because law is not just your career, it seems to be a bit of your passion.
Well, I have always maintained, for me, it's not just getting the check in the mail. If I can help someone and I can put a smile on their face, there's a reward in that for me. So the fact that I can help someone goes a long way. It's very satisfying. Not all rewards are monetary in this life.
Mr. Newman, it's very clear that you became a lawyer because you wanted to help people, and just outlining the things that you have already done today, it shows that that is working. And at the foundation, again, your integrity, your honesty, and your bluntness when it needs to be is really what has carried you throughout this amazing career. Thank you so much, Mr. Newman, for your time and sharing your passion in the law.
Well, I thank you. And if you want an education, spend the week in my office. You will learn things that you can't begin to imagine.